Hi, this is Elliot Pepper, and welcome back to my Inner Circle podcast, where I get to interview authors, entrepreneurs, investors, and other people that have fascinating things to talk about. So today I'm really excited to have John Biggs on the show. John is a tech journalist. His work has been featured in everything from Popular Science to the New York Times, and he's an editor for TechCrunch. He's the East Coast editor, so you're based in Brooklyn.
Yep, that's right. Howdy, howdy.
Howdy, howdy. Great. So, in addition to that, John's actually released a couple of books himself. Two of which are nonfiction about sort of blogging and technology, and then two of which are fiction. One, Mitra, was a young adult novel, and I think you're working on the sequel. And then you also just last summer released a collection of short stories. And the reason why I wanted to chat today is because I actually got an email from you. Let's see, what was it? About 2 weeks ago, and you started sending out a monthly newsletter that was essentially your book recommendations. And in the first one, your introduction to that newsletter, you said something that I found really interesting and that reflects many of the conversations that I've had for this podcast with a number of best-selling authors on both the fiction and the nonfiction side of the table. And that is that you are really frustrated with book discovery. And I wanted, as someone who is every day engaged with technology and with storytelling as a part of your job, I wanted to dive a little deeper into that frustration, find out what you think is broken about book discovery, both as a reader and a writer, and what trends or new tools is sort of affecting it, or what the future might look like there. So maybe we can just start as a reader. What does it mean that you're frustrated by book discovery?
Well, I mean, generally when you go on to something like
Something like
Amazon or something,
Amazon or something,
getting a little bit of echo.
getting a little bit of echo, so much.
Which side that is.
Which side that is? Okay, here, let me. How's that?
Test. That's better. That's much better. All right. So generally, when you're looking for a new book on Amazon or wherever, it's kind of a crapshoot. You either pay $9.99 for something kind of established, or you pay zero for an indie author. And 99% of the time, you're going to be kind of frustrated with that indie author because maybe it's not polished, maybe it's not ready to go. So there's no really middle ground. So I know if I go to a Hachette or a Farrar Straus Grew, or if I go to Random House, I'm going to get a book that I'm going to be able to read. But everything else is kind of a crapshoot. So one of my goals, especially with this list, and it's not a very big list by any stretch of the imagination, and it could get bigger, but it's just to show some of the books that I've been reading currently, indie books and established books, and sort of offer a curated view. And a lot of people are saying, well, why don't we just let the market, or why don't we just let the robots figure it out? And robots can't figure it out. And I've been in the news business long enough to know that a robot can't write news, and a robot can't choose interesting stuff for people to read or people to listen to or to people to watch. Occasionally it works, but once you get so much content out there, then even something like Netflix, which has some of the best robots picking movies for you, eventually they just kind of give up and just give you the garbage that everybody else watches. And it is kind of frustrating. So building out something like this, and it's also helpful because I feel like I'm giving back to both the author community that I know, maybe established authors who are going with big publishers, or the indie community that I know as well, and trying to help those guys out and trying to spread the word about some cool new books.
I think this is pretty interesting, especially because when you look at the publishing industry in general, although the major physical bookstores have essentially petered out and many of the large chains have actually gone under, independent bookstores are doing really well. And one thing that I've always loved about, as a reader, going to an independent bookstore is the staff recommends section, right? I mean, like that's almost like the most lo-fi version possible of curated book discovery. So is that sort of like the underlying dynamic here of what's making a comeback?
I guess so. I mean, you remember those because it's very familiar and it's a lot of fun because you know that the staff, if you've gone to a bookstore long enough, then you know the staff generally, so you can trust them to not to steer you wrong. And if it's a new bookstore that you've just walked into, you kind of get a sense of what the bookstore is about by that that whole selection of books. And it was a lot of fun back when we had videotapes. It was a lot of fun when we had DVDs. When you're renting all that good stuff, and it's going to be a lot of fun now because there's so much out there that you can recommend. There are plenty of services out there that are actually monetizing this, and they're treating it like a sort of an advertisement, but it's a self-selected cohort that allows you, the reader, to know the books that are on this list aren't going to be garbage, aren't going to be poorly edited, aren't going to be because it takes a certain amount of there's a certain amount of a hurdle that you have to do to jump over. Anybody with a 1,000-word document and a dream can put something on Amazon, but not anybody can make a good book.
And so you mentioned that when you are browsing for books on Amazon or anywhere, one of the proxies that you used to use for finding a high-quality story or a high-quality book was that it went through a big-name publisher, right? And you've
Sure.
sort of juxtaposed traditional indie publishing already, and as you say, anybody can post 1,000 words on Amazon, no problem. But is that space now going to be filled by a different kind of gatekeeper, like a curator who's basically a tastemaker instead of a publisher?
I mean, nobody's going to say that that's the truth, but I think that's the way we're headed. There has to be some sort of gatekeeper. Is it as bad as I make it sound? Probably not. I have a author buddy of mine who got established back in the 90s, and he looks at all this stuff and he's just aghast. He thinks he's ridiculous. Because he likes to think, and he's actually right about this. He likes to think to himself that yeah, he jumped over the wall. He's over the wall, and it was hard for him to be over the wall. He lived poor. He lived hand to mouth. He lived in horrible apartments out in the middle of nowhere, just so he could write and just so he could create his art. And now some up and coming, I don't know, Stephanie Meyer or some kind of 50 Shades of Grey kind of situation comes along and blows his sales out of the water and blows most sales out of the water, and everybody looks to self-publishing as this great new thing. But a lot of the people who are great writers really had to earn their chops, and they really had to earn the right to say that they're published. And to take that away from a certain group of people is kind of painful. And to say that you don't need to follow in their footsteps, producing good content, producing good books, producing good writing, is also a lie, because that's how this works. There's no shortcut about it. Just because you can write 5,000 words on Harry Potter fan fiction doesn't mean you can write a book that somebody wants to read. And maybe you get lucky, but you get lucky once or twice in a decade, where you get like a Stephanie Meyer, you get a Twilight. But you don't get lucky. You don't get like once or twice every year, and that's what a lot of these authors are going to have to figure out. Are they good enough to sell something? And once they get frustrated, where do they go next? Do they give up? Do they try harder, or do they create their own accretions? Do they create their own systems that were put in place a long time ago with the big publishers to make books better? And that's what big publishers originally were for. They were for, you would drop your book off at them, they would fix it for you, and they would publish it, and they would put it on a piece of paper for you. And the vast majority of people couldn't do that anymore. Now that everybody can do that, now that anybody with a dream could do that, we still need a lot of the features that those guys have, which is copy editing, which is story editing, which is production editing, cover design, all that other good stuff that costs money, and you're going to have to spend that money up front to make something that's a readable and usable product.
So, okay, so you mentioned both sort of the production values, more or less, of a book itself. So are you using a Random House quality or large publisher quality cover designer, copy editor, development editor, the whole process, right? So that's one question, and I think that sort of universally readers tend to prefer professionally produced books, right? But the other thing that you brought up is sort of the 50 Shades of Grey versus your friend, and I don't know what your friend is writing, but is it safe to assume it's more literary fiction?
Well, yeah, that guy was literary fiction, obviously. But there's another
Okay.
guy I met, Walter Isaacson, actually, He wrote The Innovators, and I was talking with him. I asked him, "Why don't you just self-publish?" He's like, "Well, I just know the guys over there. I just send stuff over, and they publish it for me."
Mm.
And for guys like that, he's been
Yeah,
doing the
yeah.
same thing for years. And I would argue that I'm in the same boat because I can say to myself, I would say, why don't they would ask me, why don't I go to a regular publisher? Like, ah, it's all right, it's fine. I can go to Amazon. I know how to do it. I can sell maybe $20,000 worth of books. I know how to do book production. I know how to do editing. I know how to do all the tricks that you need to get a book out and make it acceptable. Why should I go to a publisher? I'm fine. And the same reason, and I'm saying that for the same reason that he says that he's going to stick with his publisher, because he already knows those guys, and those guys know him, and the relationship is there. Uh, we're all building our own new relationships, but we have to figure out how to maximize on those relationships. We have to figure out how to create environments for where good books can thrive, as opposed to a million books can just show up on Kindle Unlimited and clog up our Kindles once we download them.
Sure. So, I asked Cory Doctorow the same question, and his answer was almost the same as I guess Walter Isaacson's was. And I think that what was interesting. Do you know Joanna Penn? She's like a well-known, best-selling, self-published author based in the UK.
Sounds familiar.
And yeah, so and it was sort of fun because I talked to her after I asked Cory that question, and she's almost the epitome of the new generation of sort of indie authors who have made their names on Amazon, right? So like Hugh Howey or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And her answer was that in today's world for up and coming writers, I mean, it's all good that Walter and Cory got a great deal out of the old publishing system, but for those starting to make their names today, like you, that having the option to actually publish indie and do it professionally,
Mm-hmm.
gives you a much wider spread once you've built your audience and once you've sort of achieved at least a modicum of success. So as an indie writer yourself, because now thought about book discovery from the reader's perspective. What does that mean for you in building your audience? Because as Cory also followed up and answered on the same question, like the biggest challenge that new writers have is is obscurity, right? True of almost any new artist. So now that the slush pile is public, how do you rise above the fray?
How do you rise above the fray? You have to market yourself. You essentially have to create a online identity that people want to meet and want to read, and that's done through blogging. That's done through regular abuse of the internet, through Twitter, through Facebook, and all that other good stuff. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination. One of the other values of the publishers is the mouthpieces. They were the ones that gave you the platform. Now you have to be your own platform. There are a few excellent books. Bloggers Bootcamp is the one I wrote about blogging. This is how you basically have to blog if you're going to be a writer. You have to get your words out there no matter what. And it sucks and it's horrible and seems like a lot of work. But that's the only way to do it. You're kind of stuck otherwise. There are also plenty of tools. I have on John Biggs books. I have like 2 or 3 ways that I can gather email addresses. And the best turnaround that I ever saw for book sales was been through email. And I send an email to I say, hey friend, I'm doing this. I'm really excited about it. You want to share? You want to share in my joy? And people will just click on stuff and buy stuff, and it's crazy, and it works really well. Social media is garbage. Social media doesn't have any conversion. There's no way to sell a book on social media. You can talk to people on social media. You can become a popular Twitter user on social media, but you can't sell a book on social media, no matter what. I've had Jim Gaffigan. He's a comedian. I've had him tweet saying that go buy Mitro. It's the best book in the world, and did nothing. It sold zero. It's ridiculous. Um,
Is that because of Twitter, or because as a top comedian, the people who follow him
You there?